Get the cash flow you need with an APP cash advance from CCGA. Pay expenses, make upgrades, perform maintenance, and more with interest-free and low-interest financing. Visit ccga.ca. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advance Payments Program.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for this Tuesday, August 20th, Lyndsey Smith, and it is my absolute pleasure to join you. I feel like it's been a while, and maybe that's for good reason. Of course, I was on the Friday Issues panel, but with the busy summer schedule, holidays, etc., it has been a while. So I hope you are doing well, and thank you, of course, for joining me, for listening here to RealAg Radio. We really do appreciate it. Really appreciate all the DMs and messages, all the phone calls we get with feedback on the show and the things we should be covering. And of course, as you heard yesterday and as we talked last week, very much front and center for most Canadian farmers right now is the impending dual rail strike. So at the end of today's show, be sure to stick around. I've got the top ag news of the day. We will get you an update on the latest as far as recording on the rail strike. But little sneak peek here, I'm going to tell you, I just finally, here at Real Agriculture, we feel a little vindicated that people are actually starting to talk about this in mainstream media. I feel like it's a little late, seeing as we are on the verge of the strike actually happening. We have been covering this and the potential of this strike happening since, well, March, earlier than that. And it still seems like most Canadians weren't even aware that this was a possibility, let alone an impending threat. So everybody, we need to talk about these things more. So stick around for the end of the show. We'll tackle the top ag news. We've got some economic data to go through. We've got a few political things to wade through, so we'll do that. But before we get there, we've got lots of other cool stuff to tackle on today's show. So joining me in the next segment, so just after the commercial break, you're going to hear from Paul Hermans. He's with Pioneer Seeds Canada. Of course, you're used to hearing him on the Thursday Rapid Fire at times. He's been on the Agronomist with me. He's a fantastic agronomist here in Eastern Ontario, and he last week was honored as the International Crop Advisor of the Year for 2024. That's right, for the year for internationally. So this is a pretty big award, and I thought it was pretty neat to have somebody in my own backyard honored in that way. And honestly, for Paul, I think it's an amazing and well-deserved honor. So I want to get his thoughts on this new award that he's received, and of course then dive into what he's known for, and that's top-notch agronomy, and discussing some of the late season disease pressures that we are certainly navigating in the soybean crop. So stick around for that. And then I've got a product spotlight with Allison Wilkinson of FMC. So that's in our third segment. Fourth segment ties into my discussion with Paul Hermans, and that is latest Canola School with Ian Epp of the Canola Council of Canada and Amber Bell here with Real Agriculture. The similarities between the two are, with soybeans and canola both, this time of year when disease is setting in, when you're starting to see it, of course, it's far too late to do anything about it. I mean, the canola field is potentially being swathed right now, or the soybeans are, rapidly filling and approaching sort of that time where into September we'll see that leaf drop. But what scouting does now is it informs what threats may be there the next time that field sees canola or soybeans. And that really is the key here, is that you need to know what's happening in the field now put that up against the kind of environmental conditions that, of course, have been happening in this particular growing season. And the next time you get back to that field, know potentially what's lurking in the soil on residue and how that might inform your hybrid or your variety selection. So stick around for that as well. And then, as promised, we'll do the news at the end. If you've got feedback on today's show, you just want to reach out, you got a story idea, maybe you've got somebody you want to see on The Agronomist or a topic we should tackle, you can always zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or find all of us across social media at Real Agriculture, and you can zip us a DM, and Paige, our social coordinator, will get us in touch, and we'll try and reach out and get you an answer or perhaps an interview as soon as possible. All right, let's take a quick break, and I will be back with more of RealAg Radio right after this.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
Now time for a product spotlight. We're joined by Bryce Geisel, Canada Senior Agronomist with Koch Agronomic Services. What should farmers keep in mind about protecting their nitrogen this fall?
Fall applied nitrogen is still at risk for losses by volatilization, denitrification, and leaching before and after winter sets in. So utilizing a proper inhibitor with a high rate of active ingredient can help keep that nitrogen around until spring. With a fall nitrogen application, we need to protect it not only until the soil freezes, but try to prevent losses after the snow melts in the spring as well.
So how do the products that Koch Agronomic Services measure up in active ingredients?
So Super U is the standard for dual inhibitors and has been proven over and over again by researchers. For any of those farms out there that may be using fall anhydrous ammonia, Centuro contains a new nitrification inhibitor that allows that application start before the soil cools enough to stop those microbes responsible for the nitrification of ammonia. And Anvil is a proven product to help reduce volatilization losses for farmers using operational efficiency of broadcast urea this fall. You can learn more about the products and find comparisons at defendyourend.ca.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday, August 20th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. And protect your anhydrous ammonia and bottom line, even if temperatures hit 15 degrees or below, that's not too late to apply agronomically effective, non-corrosive Centuro nitrogen stabilizer. Learn more at centuro.ca. All right, joining me now here on this Tuesdays with Lyndsey is Paul Hermans with Corteva or Pioneer Seeds Canada, whichever hat you want to wear. Welcome here, Paul.
Thank you, Lyndsey. Great to be here.
Now, I should also mention in this intro, recently named International Crop Advisor of the Year, Paul Hermans. How does that title feel?
It feels amazing. I mean, I'm just a guy from Renfrew County, and if you look across Mexico, the U.S., and Canada, and I was the award winner, and just really honored to have that award.
So it certainly, I read the write-up, really brought in not just, of course, what you do scouting fields and talking to farmers and those sorts of things, but, really recognized a lot of the work that you do, like things like this here on RealAg Radio, the extension work that you do, the Seed Sense newsletter, being on podcasts and being willing to be on things like The Agronomist. How important is extension for you in sharing your knowledge, what you're seeing in the field with farmers?
Very important, Lyndsey. I know I work for a seed company and customers buy seed, but at the end of the day, I really want to help them out and be better at what they do. So this kind of extension work, my father, just a little bit of history, worked for OMAP in extension. So I kind of got that from him and just really like doing that, helping customers out, solve problems, agronomy problems, and be better at what they do. And I work with a great bunch of customers in Eastern Ontario. They basically say, Paul, here's your field. Let's try something out, learn some agronomy, something new. We do research work and then give that information back in the wintertime. So that's really, from my perspective, really touches my heart that folks let me help them do that.
Mm-hmm. And also, I'm going to share a little behind the curtain. You showed cattle at one point, Paul. How did you jump from showing cattle to agronomy?
Well,
Come on now.
My parents own a farm. My dad worked for OMAP, rented it out. It was a dairy farmer. I worked for him. Then got into 4-H showing beef cattle, working on the dairy farm, getting up at 5 a.m. and milking 7 days a week. I thought crops was probably a lot easier to go that way, honestly, Lyndsey.
Yeah, I won't argue with that one. Absolutely. Yeah, so maybe those winter meeting seasons aren't so bad when it could be milking cows. So there you go. Okay, well, congrats to you. I think it's a fantastic honor and was really glad to see a familiar face when that news came across my desk. So well deserved. And of course, let's jump into some of those things that, of course, you do for your clients here in Eastern Ontario. Paul, we can commiserate on the wetness. Not everybody has this, but we have had it in spades. You're a 45-minute-ish drive from where I am, but we have seen just a ridiculous amount of water is the only way I can describe it. What are crops looking like where you are?
It's very variable. That's probably the word of the year. The lighter, sandier soils are looking amazing because they got great drainage. But if you get in the heavier clay soils or areas that just don't have that tile drain in, just got pounded with rains. We had that hurricane a few weeks ago, some guys 5 to 7 inches, and we just seem to be getting every other day rain, right? So, being optimistic out there, but there's going to be some challenges this year. There's going to be some high yields, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have some yields that we haven't seen in 20 years, some of the lowest yields. So, but that's just Mother Nature and the cards that were dealt to us this year.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there isn't a tile drainage close enough this year setting for this year, even though it's closer. Yeah.
If you're in the tile drainage business, I'm sure your phone's ringing off the hook, and guys are probably trying to book you here for the next couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. Now, but of course, this is, as you mentioned, we've had sort of the tail end. Well, we were already seeing a lot of rain, and then we had the tail end of Hurricane Debbie come through. We've just come out of another sort of sopping wet weekend. Now we're into some cool temperatures. You mentioned variability. I will say the corn crop where I am, still some strong fields out there, but definitely starting to see some of that yellowing. Some of those drown out spots have grown a little bit. But the beans tend to be faring okay at this point. But I just think about, there's only so much the beans can take, but are we worried about, the big diseases when it comes to soybeans in these wet conditions? Do we worry more?
Yeah, for sure. And, last year, 2023, we had a terrible white mold year in Eastern Ontario. We're kind of a white mold magnet. Fortunately, knock on wood, this year, we're not seeing much out there. That's a positive thing. But as the wheels start getting, they tend to fall off the bus as we get closer to maturity with beans, just because different diseases start to come in. And white mold's one of them, but we're seeing some more sudden death syndrome. It comes in earlier on in the plant in cool, wet conditions into the root, the crown, and then we start seeing those kind of symptoms now. We're seeing some brown stem rot out there. And it's just the biggest thing is to be able to differentiate from that, Lyndsey. When we're driving by doing that 40 mile an hour, you see a brown spot and you think it's white mold, but really get out there, do the scouting. With brown stem rot, cut into that stem, you get that packed or stacked penny look to it. Sudden death, you get that, the veins are green, in between the veins are yellowing and dying off. And then we're seeing more soybean cyst nematode too, especially in that central part of the area that I cover. So it's really getting out, scouting, learning what the problems are, because pretty soon seed selection is going to come up, right, and variety selection and different agronomic traits will help with that going forward.
Right. And this is, for our Western friends, this is also the time that, canola, it's a similar thing. So for soybeans and canola, you need to properly identify what's happening in this late season push, either, prior to leaf drop or swath timing in canola. It's similar because you have to determine what's there so that you can make those selections. At the same time, do we have, a lot of choices for all of these? I'm thinking about, obviously, for soybean cyst nematode, that becomes a huge decision driver. But what about brown stem rot? We definitely heard about that last year as well. Is that one that we can really work into our variety selection? Do we know, the differences in genetic resistance to it?
So there's nothing that's really resistant 100% out there. But I would say on the Corteva side, especially at Pioneer, we're looking at that, and we've got a new Z series soybeans coming out. Improvement in agronomic gains, sudden death syndrome, soybean cyst nematode, and white mold are probably the three key ones. So we kind of have the yield component to it, but we got that defensive traits as well. So differences out there. Talk to your pioneer sales rep about it. Not every bean's the same. And from our standpoint, though, we do see differences, which is a positive thing going forward. So sometimes a negative turns into a positive because our breeders can start to breed more for that going forward.
Now, it's my understanding, though, brown stem rot is certainly not the huge yield robber that these other diseases are. I mean, it's there, you should know what it is, but it's not necessarily the sudden death syndrome or soybean cyst nematode issue.
Exactly. Like, soybean cyst nematode in Southern Ontario is a lot bigger. Yeah. In Eastern Ontario, white mold, I think, would be our biggest one. But I'm starting to see soybean cyst nematode and SDS, sudden death syndrome, probably being number 2 and 3, basically. Or battling for number 2 in Eastern Ontario. And we're starting to see more corn bean rotation, more bean on beans, especially this year with the commodity prices. So it's those kind of things that are coming to play in our area.
I heard Albert Tenuta, I'm going to put words in his mouth, but he says that SDS and SCN often go together. I call them disease buddies. He does not call them that, but I do. So if a farmer is out there scouting and suspects sudden death syndrome, should they be looking then for soybean cyst nematode?
Definitely. I had a customer last week that sent me pictures of SDS, and I texted them back, said, first thing, dig it up, wash the roots, and sure enough, right there was he could see the soybean cyst on the roots. So they kind of go hand in hand. Watch the two together, and that'll help you, get a better diagnosis of what's going on out in your field.
Now, so digging into that a little bit, is it that the plant sort of is weakened because of one, and so the other can work in, or is it that conditions favor both of them at the same time? Why are they sort of related?
Kind of a relation. What you're saying exactly, Lyndsey. It's you look at sudden death syndrome. It comes early on in the year, right? Into the roots, into the crown of that. And basically, if I have the eggs or cysts there present, it's a lot easier to get into it. So it's kind of like saying if you're walking along, if I hit you and take your right leg out, you can still hop along. But if you take your left leg out, well, guess what? You fall over, stumble, and it's kind of game over. So they're both opportunistic, work together, and a lot, based on history, rotation, soil types, environment, that kind of stuff that kind of comes to play as well.
Now, we can test for soybean cyst nematode in our soils. With sudden death syndrome, do we just have to scout and choose our varieties for that?
Yeah, basically it's scouting, getting a sense of what's out there, keeping notes, and it tends, we tend to see it more on those loamier type of soils, the sudden death part in Eastern Ontario anyway, but keeping track of that history and then following through, 2-3 years down the road when you get back into beans and keeping track of that. So unfortunately, there's no real sudden death syndrome test that I know of that you can do. So it's more that scouting aspect and keeping an eye on your fields.
Good field records can pay off. Let's white mold is certainly for Eastern Ontario by far the biggest question here. We are right now at least a bit of a reprieve from the heat. We're a little cooler, but we've had a lot of rain. But have we had the high humidity too that favors white mold, or have we perhaps maybe dodged at least some of the early stages of growth of this disease because of just how rainy we've been?
Yeah, and I think that's been it. It's been too wet. We always talk about we need the moisture for the sclerotinia and the apothecia basically to send the spores out. But I think this year we just had that soil zone was too wet, too saturated, and basically prevented that from happening, which is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
You talk about humidity and stuff. I think the humidity was right, but also I think we were almost too warm in some cases this year. Going back, looking at July's records, we had, I think it was 8 out of 31 days that was above 31 degrees, right? Some really hot days. So it's that disease triangle. The environment really plays into there. You need the pathogen, the host, but it's that environment this year that, kind of was different than 2023 that made a big difference.
Just briefly, I do want to touch on corn. Looking at, you mentioned how variable it is. What are we thinking on the gibberella front in light of all this moisture, humidity, heat, etc.? Are we gearing up for something we're worried about, or how are we feeling so far?
Well, for Eastern Ontario, we generally don't have much gib in Eastern Ontario, but I think Southern Ontario, that's a totally different climate. I know we got a lot of listeners across different areas. That's something I think that we're going to have to keep a watch out for, scouting the fields. And then, if we start seeing it, get the harvest going, get it off, get it dried, get it out of the field before it starts spreading more. So definitely stuff to watch out for. again, we're, in Eastern Ontario, we're about, I'm going to say 2 to 3 weeks away from silage season, a good month or so before black layer. So that's just around the corner. Again, keep scouting the fields, prioritizing, and then deciding which fields we're going to harvest first versus second and third and so forth.
2 or 3 weeks is not a lot of time to dry out, Paul.
No, it isn't.
So if we could do that before we have to get those silage wagons in the field, that'd be great.
Yeah, just turn the taps off until the end of harvest. We're fine. We have enough moisture now.
We have enough. Yeah.
Let's have a great fall, please.
Yes, please. Okay. All right. Paul, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lyndsey. Appreciate being on.
We're going to take a quick break here on RealAg Radio, and I will be back with today's Product Spotlight with Allison Wilkinson of FMC right after this.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's hybrid fall rye varieties and their end uses, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your fall seed strategy specific to your region.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at optimumglide.ca.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now for today's Product Spotlight is Allison Wilkinson. She's a product manager with FMC. Welcome here, Allison.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to talk about one of my favorite agronomy topics, and people may not know this, but I love fall weed control. It may not be as satisfying as in-crop weed control, but it is effective. So what do we need to know? Common. Yes, exactly. So why, maybe that's where we'll start. Why is fall weed control such an effective part of a weed control plan?
Absolutely. So some of the benefits of fall applied herbicides are helping minimize weed pressure and, of course, minimizing the workload come the next spring. So especially when you're using some soil applied extended weed control options that we have at FMC, that will really get ahead and help control spring emerging weeds. When we apply those products late in the fall, especially when soil temperatures have cooled off to 10 degrees Celsius or less before freeze up, the extended weed control herbicides will sit inactive on the soil surface, meaning they won't bind to any green growth or crop residue or start the degradation process until activation happens in the following spring due to a moisture event. So what we mean by that is activation will occur once half an inch to 1 inch of moisture at once happens. So that's either during, early or late snow melt or an early spring rainfall event. Mm-hmm. At that point, the product will move into the soil water and become available for root uptake of those pesky germinating weeds in the springtime. So this is really how products like Authority 480 and Authority Supreme herbicides work. Applying them just before freeze up, like I said, increases the consistency and quality of their performance because of that guaranteed moisture event.
All right, so tell me more about Authority 480. What do growers really need to know to use this product to the best of its ability on their farms?
Absolutely. So again, using it in the fall and before, I moisture event definitely is best practice there. But Authority 480 herbicide is a really important part of a herbicide layering program and resistant management tool for farmers growing crops like wheat, field peas, flax, and more importantly, it's really a great option for controlling kochia in the field. So considering the high levels of group 2 and group 4 resistant biotypes, it is nice to have a group 14 that can be applied in the fall to work right away on those germinating kochia plants, but also in the following spring, should it be applied later in the fall. And along with kochia, Authority brands also offer control on hard to kill weeds that are important to kind of get ahead of. So those weeds including Russian thistle as well as wild buckwheat when used at the higher rates.
Those are, you have hit some of the highlights of probably, well, kochia especially, I think it's probably number one on most farmers' list. And as you mentioned, it is one with multiple resistance. And so we need to have those tools in the toolbox for our herbicide layering programs. Now, I understand FMC is also running their community support program again. Tell me a bit about what this program is and how can people find out more information?
You are right. We're really excited. 2024 marks our 4th year running FMC Clean Fields Community Yields program. It's a program that we are very passionate about here at FMC. Your local retailer will choose a community program or charitable organization to support. And when you purchase a product like Authority 480 or Authority Supreme Herbicide, FMC will donate 10 cents per acre to that chosen organization. We're really proud of this program here at FMC. Since 2020, we have donated over $460,000 to 863 local organizations across Western Canada. And some of our other brands, Express Brands and Truvix Herbicide and Precision Pack Blends, are also eligible purchases to be part of this program. So for more information on any of the herbicides or on the Clean Fields Community Yields program, you can visit ag.fmc.com/ca or your local retailer. And of course, we have an FMC account manager in your area that are always around to help out with any questions or concerns coming in through your local retailer.
All right. So that is super important. If anyone, of course, is interested for some of those details or wants to know more, maybe if you've got an idea of one of those local organizations that maybe could benefit, get in touch with your FMC account manager or that website again, ag, so ag.fmc.com/ca, or talk to your local retailer. Fantastic. All right. And of course, this is an ample time, everyone, to get your Authority 480 lined up so that you're ready to rock and roll after harvest to get that fall herbicide application on. So, Allison, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having me, Lyndsey.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Apply anhydrous ammonia and protect your application earlier than normal this fall. Defend against potential losses and protect your bottom line with Centuro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Patented active ingredient pronitridine offers agronomically effective protection where it matters most, below ground. Easy to handle Centuro is also non-corrosive for fewer worries about downtime or equipment damage. Start early with Centuro as part of your nitrogen management plan. Contact your local retailer or visit centuro.ca for more information today. Doing more in the field is possible when you add the proven power of Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next generation dual-active urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. Driven by Duramide technology, Anvil gives growers the advantages of low application rate and long-lasting protection, all thanks to Duramide, a Koch-patented active ingredient. Defend against volatilization, boost efficiency, accomplish more. Learn all about the dual-active power of Anvil by visiting anvil.ca. That's ANVOL.ca.
Welcome back to Tuesdays with Lyndsey here on this August 20th on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this is RealAg Radio. This segment is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. All right, we hop now to a canola school that we posted at RealAgriculture.com just last week. We're digging in, that's right, to what's happening below ground and within those canola stems, taking a look at swath timing or at harvest, but earlier's better, on what may be lurking within your canola stand.
Hi, Amber Bell here with Real Agriculture. I am standing here today with Ian Epp, who is on the Canola Council of Canada, and we're doing a canola school speaking about scouting for disease at swath timing, which from the field behind us, you can see that we're about to start swathing pretty quick here. So welcome, Ian. It's fantastic to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about diseases. And let's just jump right into it. So what are some of the diseases that you should be scouting for at swathing?
So there's a couple. It used to be the big 3 diseases we talk about canola. Now we have verticillium kind of added into the mix, so the big 4. So the big 4, I'll do it actually as we go through the plant. You pull out your plant and you're scouting. The first plant thing you want to check for is clubroot. Clubroot's going to be below the soil surface. You want to look at the roots and you want to see if there's any galls, any weird tubers, anything going on. So that's the first thing. So anytime you're looking for diseases, first always pull the plant out of the dirt. All right, so that's clubroot. This one doesn't have any clubroot. Then we're going to start cutting, and we're going to cut the stem. I like starting a little lower and starting just slowly cutting a little off the top as you work your way up. And we're looking at the color of the stem in there. If there's any black, we're probably going to see some blackleg. We could also be seeing some verticillium in there. So it's important to be able to try to tell the difference. But again, blackleg and sclerotinia. Verticillium being soil burn usually comes from the roots, so I'd start cutting a little lower, and if it's really low, it's more likely to be verticillium, and start cutting your way up as we get this pie-shaped black going on as we get a little bit higher up. That could be blackleg. This one has just an inkling of it, but not a whole lot of blackleg. So then we've covered 3 of our diseases. The last one is sclerotinia. Sclerotinia is above ground, so we're looking at the stems, usually the main stem. And then we're going to look here, and do we see any sclerotinia lesions, some premature whitening, any lesions? We'll see some deadening or some bleaching happening here if we have sclerotinia. And we can open it up and see those sclerotia bodies with kind of the black sclerotia bodies. So those are the big diseases to be looking for. That's kind of the 4 diseases. So as we're going through the plant, you want to pull a number of plants throughout the field. Swathing timing is a great timing to do it. And, you know, if you are running a swather or spraying, you maybe you're playing pre-harvest glyphosate on your canola, that's a great time to be checking different parts. So have your handy-dandy clippers with you, and just a number of times in the field, get out and do that assessment on a number of plants and try to figure out what diseases you have. Maybe you don't have any diseases, or which ones, and then from there we can kind of figure out, are they causing us yield loss? It's too late for this year, right? We're at swath timing. It's the yield is set for this year, but this doesn't make different management decisions for next year. We can always learn. You're probably going to be buying canola seed for next year here fairly quick. So if you have no problems, you know, what you're doing is currently working. If you have a big blackleg problem coming up, and blackleg can be pretty sneaky, it's pretty common to find fields with 5 or 10% yield loss, then maybe that's something we want to be considering as we're planning for next year.
Okay, and at what point should you be deciding whether or not you should be sending samples to a lab?
Yeah, so in general, if you find diseases and you're not quite sure, sending in samples to a lab is always a good choice. For things like blackleg, you can find out, confirm it is blackleg. The symptoms can be pretty easy, but sometimes it's sneaky, and sometimes you'll see multiple diseases. So figuring out if it's blackleg. You can also do race testing with blackleg. So you can find out specifically what race of blackleg's in your field, and then knowing that, you can pick a variety that next time you grow canola on that field will be better resistant at the races you have specifically. So you can gain more information than you can from the field. Verticillium, I would always send it to the lab.
Okay.
There's visual symptoms, but because you're never quite sure, it's still a new disease, and you probably see some blackleg with it, sending it to the lab, just confirm it is verticillium. And then sclerotinia you're probably pretty good on. And for clubroot, just confirming that it is clubroot. There are some other things that do cause little bumps or weird things on the roots. The more plants you look at, you'll find all sorts of weird things. Hybridization nodules, these little circles, can look like the beginnings of a little bit of clubroot, but it's not. So if in doubt, sending it away to lab is a cost-effective, it's a cheap way to figure out that it is actually this disease. Especially if you're going to make an important management decision for the next year based on that. It's a little, just making sure is always a good idea.
Right, and I guess speaking of management decisions, like when you're going for a resistance package, do you have any recommendations for how a grower might choose their resistance package? Like what's going to be the most important depending on which diseases you're seeing?
Yeah, so that's the key thing. Doing disease scouting now, you find out what diseases you maybe have, and then you can pick which ones are the most important. When you're picking your canola variety, there's so many different traits you can choose from, right? And not every variety is going to have all of the traits, and some, so I would pick probably if you have a blackleg problem, let's deal with that. That's a highly manageable one, and like I said, it's easy to lose 5 or 10%. You see a lot of fields that are regularly rating as a number 2 on the blackleg scale, which is 10% yield loss. It's sneaky. You might not see it from the road, but 10% is a massive yield loss. So versus picking the top maybe the top yielding variety, if you have one that for sure takes good control of your blackleg, that might be the most important decision. If you have no blackleg in your field or your stems are clean, whatever your blackleg management program is good, and maybe then it is a different one. Clubroot is a great one to have. Most varieties these days are getting to be clubroot resistant. In Saskatchewan here, I'm not really picky on what kind of clubroot resistance, as long as you have clubroot resistance, and then monitoring again to make sure that the clubroot resistance is working. If you see a resistant variety with galls forming on it, you have a problem. But again, just picking the right, the biggest yield limiting factor in your field or on your farm, right? And that changes region to region, it changes farm to farm. Sometimes it changes year to year, but things like blackleg and clubroot have a lot of management decisions that you can do to kind of make a better decision for next year.
Right. And then when it comes to management decisions, so let's say you've scouted your field, you have blackleg and clubroot. How much of a concern is it when you go to a field that's like 2 miles out, right? If you're going to be picking your seed package, should you be considering what you have in one field even though it's a couple miles away?
Yeah, for clubroot, if you have clubroot on one spot on the farm, there's a pretty good chance you might have clubroot on other fields. So for sure, if you see clubroot, you want to be growing clubroot resistant variety. And if you see it breaking down, you might be good to having different clubroot resistant varieties on the farm. In general, just having clubroot resistant varieties on the farm is key. For blackleg, you could see differences from field to field. And right, we're assessing blackleg in this field. This field's not going to be canola next year. It's going to be a field down the road. But if you have a similar cropping history, if you've grown the same types of varieties over and over, the blackleg races that are happening in this field, there's a pretty good chance they'll be similar races in that field. Not a perfect solution, but it can give you a bit of an insight on what next year might look like. You can also go on, especially on a tighter rotation, if you go to a field that's going to be canola next year, and you can still find residue from the last canola crop, pretty good chance you have higher risk for blackleg, but you can also collect those old samples, those woody samples, and you can take them to the lab, and then you can get race tested and find out, oh, this is exactly the blackleg races that are there from last year, and then you can pick the right variety. So using an adjacent field or a different field on the farm as a proxy can work, or going directly to the source works. Either way, depending on if those old stems are still around.
That's great. I guess that would come into like record management as well. You want to be keeping records over the years on each field.
Often the fields with the biggest blackleg problems have grown the same variety over and over. Well, all the varieties are resistant, but that resistance erodes over time. So if you're growing a same variety year after year, or one with the same blackleg gene, there's a higher chance you're going to have a big blackleg problem.
Okay, so not only should we be doing crop rotations, but we should also be doing variety rotations.
Yeah, and again, not just variety rotations, but changing the R gene, which if you know what the variety has in R gene, you can then pick a variety with a different R gene, and that will help keep the blackleg at a minimum.
That's great. Well, do you have any words of encouragement for producers as we go into our swathing season?
As we get into winter extension season, quite often I get questions on what variety would I grow, or somebody will say, what variety do you grow on your farm, wanting to know, and that's great. But the key thing is now, if we have more information from this fall on blackleg is this, or I have this sclerotinia, or I have clubroot, or whatever. The more information we can grab now this fall, as we go through the winter decision-making process, we kind of set up the next year's crop. The more information we have, the better decisions we can make. So take the time now. It doesn't take very long. Every half an hour or something, hop out of the swather, hop out of the sprayer, cut 20 plants, quickly look at them, takes 5 minutes, and then you have an idea of what to do for next year.
And you can use it as an excuse to stretch your legs.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And that was Ian Epp on Real Agriculture.
All right, well, thank you. Big thanks to Ian Epp with the Canola Council of Canada, and of course Amber Bell, our Alberta field editor, for bringing in that report from the Canola School. As I mentioned, you can find all our Canola School episodes. We have years worth at canolaschool.com, or head on over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel. We've got a playlist there as well. Every year we update it. We start a new one, and we try and cover all the key agronomic issues that you grapple with season to season. So this is your reminder. If you are swathing, that you need to, when you take your breaks, hopping out of the swather, make sure that you're clipping some stems, pulling some stems, and keep those clippers handy. This is very important. So, and similarly to the conversation earlier with Paul Hermans, identifying actually what you have in the field, what you're grappling with, that is going to inform the next time you come back to that field with canola. You need to have that lineup in front of you of what was in that field before as far as diseases go, so you can make, of course, the most informed decision on that hybrid that you choose for that field. All right, let's jump to a break, and I'm going to be back. There is a lot happening, y'all, and it is time for some ag news. We'll get to that right after this.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by FP Genetics Hybrid Fall Rye. Innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP Territory Manager to discuss your fall seed strategy and discover Hybrid Fall Rye's flexible end uses for marketing, milling, distilling, ethanol, and feed. Visit hybridfallrye.ca today. As promised, I'm bringing you the top ag news, and of course, we need to start with the impending dual rail strike. So that is the deadline of August 22nd at midnight. So technically, this is middle of the night on Wednesday. But as of Thursday, CN and CKCP are threatening a total lockout of their staff, and of course the Teamsters Union is also in a strike position. So one way or the other, everything grinds to a halt on Thursday, assuming of course that nothing happens between now and then. So what could happen? As we went through sort of some of the options last week, Labour Minister Steve McKinnon has said he turned down the push for binding arbitration before the deadline. Now, would the Labour Minister impose binding arbitration after the deadline, which would, I guess, be perhaps more politically palatable? Perhaps. We could see that happen, certainly. There could be back-to-work legislation, but that's unlikely to actually work. The key here, though, is that I think many are quite frustrated within the ag space, as well as others, that we are getting to this point. The fact that we could even be facing a dual rail strike is pretty profound. This is a huge economic risk for the country. And yes, we think about rail as a Western Canadian issue, but we're talking about all goods that move by rail. So many businesses are going to be impacted. $1 billion worth of goods move by rail every single day. So this is major. I would say, as Calvin Hepner pointed out yesterday via Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, that the Conservatives have been quite silent. So they are, of course, the opposition. We haven't heard a lot from them on what they figure the government should be doing. And then, of course, we've got the Labour Minister, who is potentially not doing what everyone is asking him to do. So what happens now is really going to be the big question on Thursday. We will also note that even if, let's say at the 11th hour or shortly after a strike occurs, they go to binding arbitration, even in that eventuality, there already have been impacts, and there will continue to be at least for several days. So we've covered a few times, but what ends up happening is, in the event of a strike, certain goods have already been held back, so that whatever is left on the rail is not, let's say, it can't spoil, or it's not something that's highly dangerous to move by rail. So certain things like fertilizer, food, medicine has all been embargoed, meaning it hasn't been moving for the past few days in anticipation, so it doesn't get stuck in transit. We also saw that Maersk, the container company, had stopped shipments of containers to Canada in anticipation of this as well. Because, of course, if this goes on for a long time or even a short time, there would be no return containers. So the container traffic, we know, is very much an integrated supply chain. We learned all this through COVID. And so we're already seeing some significant disruptions. Even if a strike is, say, avoided at the last moment, or if it's a very short strike, there's still going to be some economic impacts because we got to this point. Now, sticking with economic news, but perhaps at least for July, some better news. We did see Statistics Canada came out with the inflation numbers for July, and they were down a titch to 2.5% June to July. So July, we saw inflation numbers dip lower than June, which is good news. This is, of course, what the Bank of Canada would like to see. They want to see inflation come close to that 2% or there and abouts, maybe under a little bit. And of course, we are on the heels of 2 rate reductions by the Bank of Canada. So this lower inflation number does perhaps suggest that was the right move and things are going in the right direction. Now, there is, of course, always the discussion, do you overcorrect and end up in a recession and have perhaps deflation happening? We're a long way from that. Let's put it that way. The decrease, though, in inflation was pegged to lower car prices, lower electricity prices, and a few other things. So, yeah, so the economy responding as we sort of would hope as far as the inflationary figure goes. Now, does that significantly change affordability? Let's remember that, of course, we've gone through quite a long period, at least in a recency bias, of inflation. And so those inflated prices still, of course, exist. We just didn't see them grow significantly in July. Now, this lower number was anticipated by the trade, and there is talk that we could see more Bank of Canada rate reductions in the rest of 2024, so 2, perhaps 3 more, which is, of course, good news for anybody who's got, let's say, mortgages to renew, or anyone who is holding loans in a variable scenario where they would save a little bit month by month on their interest. So good news there. It does also put some downward pressure on the Canadian dollar. Tip of the hat to Calvin Hepner for this discussion earlier today. That meaning that it does buffer Canadian crop prices just slightly in these lower crop price times. So we're going to take this one as a win, at least for right now. All right. There are a few other news stories we need to get through today, of which is, of course, I'm from Manitoba originally, and if you're of a certain age, like I am, and lived in Winnipeg or Manitoba for any length of time, you know the name Charles Adler. There was Adler Online, broadcaster on CJOB, held a talk radio show for many years, known to be brash, known to be opinionated. Well, that brash, opinionated person has actually been named to the Senate. And we did have some interesting conversations about this. We knew it would be somewhat controversial, perhaps a bit of a head scratcher for some people, wondering, we have an appointed Senate. It is the Governor General who appoints them, but it is on the advice of the Prime Minister. So this is Justin Trudeau has put this name forward for one of the Manitoba senators. Charles Adler, as I said, definitely a contentious person at times, and is certainly in quite a bit of hot water over comments he made some time ago about our Indigenous population. So our Indigenous population is not terribly pleased to see this Senate appointment, and I think there's probably a few other people who would be as well. But I'm sure there's plenty who think this is a wonderful idea. At the same time, I have to say it is a little surprising to see Justin Trudeau appointing Charles Adler. It may make for a much more controversial or lively Senate debate, potentially. We'll have to see how this all shakes out, of course, once Adler is actually in the Senate, and once they begin sitting again, we'll see where this all goes. It certainly brings up a few questions in my mind, but away we go. If you've got any feedback on this one, which I'm sure there are many of you that do, drop us a line, 855-776-6147. It'll be just like being on a radio show, because it is a radio show. There you go. Anyway, so that was an interesting one, I got to tell you. A little surprised to see that one. Now, in other news, we've also got a reminder for all of you who are starting that combine in Western Canada. It's lovely to see so many of the tweets and the reels and the shares on Insta of the combine starting to roll. I know in the pulses, we had some pretty variable yields coming in. There's still others to come in, and really just getting going in the cereals. A reminder about the harvest sample program. So the Canadian Grain Commission has the harvest sample program every year. You do, of course, have quite a few months to submit your samples, but once harvest is rolling, you can, of course, send them in. This is a voluntary program, if you're not aware. And basically, you can get a independent third-party grade for your grain. So you can get, if you send in your harvest sample, you can get a falling number for your wheat and rye. You can get DOM levels, so the vomitoxin levels for wheat, corn, barley, and oats. You can get a dockage assessment on canola and mustard. You'll get a protein content on barley, beans, chickpeas, lentils, oats, peas, and wheat. And oil, protein, and chlorophyll, so green seed on canola, oil and protein and iodine for flax, and oil and protein for mustard seed and soybeans. And so this is, it's also, of course, one of those, it's a voluntary program, but the CGC then uses those samples that they receive. Yes, you get a grade back, but they also use that as sort of a proxy for what the Western Canadian harvest looks like as far as quality and some of the issues and those sorts of things. So it's sort of a proxy surveillance program as to the quality and different components of the crops out there, but also, of course, farmers get their grade back. So if you'd like to participate, you can get in touch with the Canadian Grain Commission and submit your samples for the harvest sample program. And finally, one of the other stories I found really entertaining today, entertaining in a sort of schadenfreude way, is the U.S. dairy industry is having a bit of a spat with Colombia's agriculture industry, the dairy industry. And so this story comes from Magnetic Ag, who brought this to my attention. And Colombia basically is saying that U.S. milk powder coming into the country is subsidized by the U.S. government and therefore has an unfair advantage in the Colombian market. Does this sound familiar to anybody here in the Canadian dairy market? Thus, this is why I found it so interesting, is that essentially Colombia is kind of doing to the U.S. what the U.S. does to Canada. So I found that really interesting. Now, it is, though, an indicative of potentially Colombia becoming a bit more protectionist about its own markets. So it doesn't stop at milk powder. It's also feed corn that Colombia is perhaps being a bit more restrictive on as it's trying to protect its own domestic supplies. So, of course, the National Milk Producers Federation and the U.S. Dairy Export Council says this is, of course, untrue, and that U.S. powdered milk doesn't receive subsidies and is not the same as Colombian fluid milk. So they are arguing the point, but I just thought it was interesting to hear that sometimes the things that happen to Canada also happen to the U.S., just in different context. So I found that interesting. Maybe you did too. All right, that does it for today's show. Of course, we'll see you back 4:30 Eastern tomorrow, right here on Rural Radio Channel 147. We'll be keeping you up to date on what's happening with the impending rail strike that is set to go on Thursday. We've got a bit of a change of schedule this week because Sean Haney's at CBIC at Saskatoon, and so we'll have a special show from that this week. So the Farmer Rapid Fire will actually be tomorrow, which is super exciting. All right, if you've got feedback on today's show, find us across social media at Real Agriculture. Head on over to YouTube. You can catch all our videos there, and I will be back for the Issues Panel on Friday. Cheers, everybody.
Get flexible farm financing with an APP cash advance from CCGA. Save on interest costs and sell when the time and price are best for you. Visit ccga.ca to learn more. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advanced Payments Program.